This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Just a brief, perfunctory introduction to this episode during this very abnormal time. This episode includes an interview with Mark Russell, the author of the comic book Second Coming, which is a sort of fictional telling of Jesus coming to Earth and rooming with a Superman-type character. It's a really great conversation, and I hope that given the sort of environment that we all find ourselves in and a sense of just worry and uncertainty, that you can find a little bit of distraction and something within this conversation. It's really hard to, preface this or have anything wise or right to say in a moment like this. Feels very uncharted for most people. And all I can say is that whether you are practicing social distancing or self-isolating because you are exhibiting symptoms but haven't been tested, or if you are sick, please take care of yourself and those in your life. Do what you can to be kind and compassionate to others. Do what you can to help others that need it, that might be immunocompromised. Do that wisely and safely. Listen to your local municipalities and follow the instructions of your employers and others that are trying to give you guidance in a time when there's really no guidance to speak of coming from our federal government or this administration. It's tragic, but we're all doing what we can to help one another. If you need some sort of online community, we do have a large community on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/exvangelical. You can just apply there and find some community if you have not joined that group yet. Again, everyone, just please take care of yourselves and those within your immediate sphere. This is such an odd time, and we're all sort of learning on our feet. I do want to thank people who have been great examples online of trying to lift up those in need, trying to keep things light or to acclimate to this new environment in which we're all living, when there's school closures and offices moving to remote work as well as they can. That includes people like Caitlin Curtis, who has put up a lot of really meaningful threads on Twitter and elsewhere on Instagram, and people like Andre Henry, who are reminding us that that hope is something to strive for, and that things like this present opportunities to examine what is valuable in our culture and what deserves to be preserved. I hope that you all are well, and if you are not well, that you are getting the care that you need. I know it seems silly to say things like this, but sure, you can follow me on Twitter at brchastain, on Instagram at brchastain_. You can like the show over at facebook.com/exvangelicalpod, and you can sign up for my newsletter, the Post Evangelical Post, over at postevangelicalpost.com. That'll be it. I mean, it's not so much promotion as just if you want to follow me or reach out to me during this time, please do. We're doing what is best for our family here in Chicago, and I hope that wherever you are, that you are doing what you need as well. All right, everyone, be well. Enjoy this conversation. I hope that it gives you some sense of comfort or normalcy to listen to this or any other podcasts or content that is comforting to you or is part of your consumption habits or whatever during normal times. I'm thankful for you all. Be well. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Exvangelical. I have with me today a return guest, Mark Russell. He is the author of the book Second Coming, as well as many other comics, including The Flintstones, Wonder Twins, Red Sonja, and many others, as well as the book God is Disappointed in You, and also author of the upcoming book Billionaire Island. Welcome back to the show, Mark.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining me. Congratulations on the first volume of Second Coming, just reaching press and was released just last week. The first volume was really great, and I'm excited to sort of learn a bit more about that particular book specifically. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't be happier with the way it turned out.
Yeah, it was great. We talked actually last year, a bit before it reached publication, and so it was sort of in a bit of limbo at that point when we last talked. So it was great to sort of see this work come to light and be visible and in the market, just because it didn't have the easiest path to publication.
No, it was about a year from the time I actually, was approved to the time where it actually issue number 1 came out, which I've never had before. I've never had that long a delay between writing a thing and getting it actually published.
And is that with Ahoy directly, your publisher?
No, that's including the time of beginning with Vertigo.
Right.
Because originally, it was approved with Vertigo, and I was writing the issues, in the like spring of, I think, 2018, if I remember correctly, and and then it kept getting pushed back because of the controversy, and they wanted to release it with like this, with a wave of other Vertigo titles, and then ended up getting, we have to like take it away from Vertigo and go with Ahoy. So there's just all these delays. So to finally have it out so people can actually read it, because there's about a year, over a year. There was about a year and a half where between the time of it being announced and and it actually coming out in like issue number 1 actually dropping.
Yeah, that's a long development time. What is typical in the comic market for you and your experience?
Usually about 5-6 months.
Okay, from pitch to like the first issue hitting.
From the time where it's been greenlit to the time it actually starts hitting the shelf.
Gotcha. And to sort of elaborate for some of the listeners that might not know the controversy that we were referring to, there you actually got some blowback because news of the series, someone got wind of it and it got passed around in conservative media, and then there was a petition, and which garnered a lot of signatures.
Yeah.
So
basically, initially it was announced in July at San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago, and there wasn't much of a reaction to it, positive or negative. It was just kind of like, okay. But then in December, because we were planning originally a release early 2019, I believe, but then like in December, the Fox News got a hold of it. I think it was maybe the sort of thing where the Mueller Commission was, and actually I think this was actually December 2018 this happened. Like the Mueller Commission was coming out, and I think it was kind of one of these things where Fox News didn't want to actually report on the actual news because all of it looked bad for them. So when that happens, and I don't know if you have any Fox News viewers out there, but when that happens, typically what they do is they reach for these culture war stories, things that are sort of like maybe not necessarily topical, but that will serve to get their viewers up in the lather and get them angry, and therefore getting them to sort of like rally around Trump or whatever their cause celeb is without questioning it too much. And I just happened to be the culture war story once where it's like, did you know that they're making a comic book about Jesus Christ and a superhero, and nobody really knew anything about the comic book because nobody other than myself had actually read the scripts, which sort of I think gave them license to sort of make up whatever they wanted about it. So they made it up like it was this like really blasphemous sort of like insulting mockery of Christ and Christianity. It sort of made the rounds through conservative media from there, resulting in, as you mentioned, a petition campaign, which ended up getting about 500,000 signatures, all of which generated an angry email that went directly to my publisher. And so, like, I talked. It was Dan DiDio at DC was the publisher,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't realize what was happening until he got about 130,000 of these emails.
Oh my gosh.
So he said, "Well, the next time you come down to DC headquarters, I'm gonna make you clean out my inbox."
Oh man.
But and it's the kind of thing where it looks like on the face of it, you've got all these angry villagers with torches and pitchforks storming the castle, when in reality, it's like, signing the petition takes about 3 seconds to click on it. So, you get
right.
one woman in Krakow, Poland, another person in, Little Rock, Arkansas, somebody else in, Moscow, Russia. It's not like a throng of angry villagers so much as like some sad person at home alone with nothing better to do, just making a click on their mouse and then instantly forgetting about it. And I think that they sort of realize this, like, oh, it's, this sort of online fury is easy to manufacture, and it doesn't really mean a lot, especially if, it's not, if it's making the national media rounds, then it's probably 99% of the people who are signing this petition or outraged by it aren't really comic book fans to begin with.
Right. Yeah. It's just the general idea on its face based on a 30-second.
They're angry enough to like spend 5 seconds clicking a petition.
Right.
Who knows how angry they are beyond that point.
Right. It's like right-wing slacktivism.
Yeah. Right. And part of the problem being published by a company that's owned by a major corporation that's selling lunch pails and t-shirts is that they do actually have to worry about people who are not necessarily comic book buyers.
Right.
That these people do represent a large, everyone is a potentially a consumer of like, Justice League movie or, of like a Batman t-shirt. So they have to worry about offending pretty much everybody. So
I think to your point, like these aren't people that knew because they sure as hell didn't know about Preacher.
Yeah.
Which is on the same imprint. And
it was pretty much manufactured outrage,
right.
Especially because it was coming out on Vertigo, which is sort of the imprint for this is not, it's sort of like Pontius Pilate washing his hands of,
right.
Christ. It's like DC washing their hands saying, this is not the normal DC fare. This is a separate imprint. Don't at me because you read something in Vertigo that you didn't like. It's the whole point. The whole raison d'etre of Vertigo is to sort of like do the stuff that they normally wouldn't be able to do on the DC main line. But I think add to that controversy the fact that there was like all this sort of executive change at the top of DC. It was just a bad time to stand out like that. It was a bad time. Nobody wanted to get called into the principal's office.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sure that an already risk-averse big corporation is probably more on edge.
Right. When people are getting laid off and, executives are in flux and there's a new president and, there's all this stuff. So the timing was just really bad. And then add to that the controversy. But
right.
So I just kind of had a frank conversation with DC because they were probably going to, they weren't dropping it per se, but they wanted to keep delaying it and to like make all kinds of changes to make it, less inflammatory. So they just said, well, we hate to see this change because, we think we believe in the project. Have you considered if you wanted to, you could ask us to give you the rights back and we would do it. So I said, yes, please.
That's great.
and they were very nice about it. I still work with DC on a lot of projects. They're really great to work with, and I thought the way they handled it, which I totally understand their perspective, being owned by Warner Brothers and a major corporation, and having to like hew to this sort of mass consumption in a way that smaller companies do not. It by nature makes them a little less daring. So this was just maybe never the right project for them in the first place.
Yeah.
So, but I totally give them credit for taking a chance on this project that would have that was kind of edgy and maybe outside their normal fare. It was just maybe like at the end, probably like a snake trying to swallow an elephant.
Yeah.
But they were very gracious. They gave me the rights back, and they let me keep the money they'd pay me to write it. And and one of the reasons, and then I took it to Ahoy. One of the main reasons being that they are kind of the opposite of DC in that sense that they're a very small company. So to them, any publicity is good publicity. They're like a controversy. Well, yes, please.
Right. Yeah. It's great, again, that you found a new home for the story, because I really enjoy it. I really enjoyed reading it as it was coming out. And just to sort of close out this preface about the controversy and everything, what is the elevator pitch of this controversial story that you're telling in Second Coming?
I don't remember exactly what I actually used as my elevator pitch. I know that it came when I was pitching several ideas for a Superman comic to Dan DiDio, and he hated all of them. Basically, he's like, "No, that's been done. That's been done. That happened in 1963." And then this is the last idea I had, and I just had it sort of at the bottom of my bag. I was hoping not to bring it up because I thought they would just laugh me out of the meeting. So I said, well, there is one more, and it's it's about Jesus Christ sharing an apartment with Superman, and them sort of like looking at the world from two opposite angles. And he said, well, that's not been done before. He's like, but I get death threats every, when Superman refuses to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So make it a non-Superman hero, and I will greenlight this as a Vertigo property. So that's basically how I pitched it. And it really was the combination of two ideas. I had a comic idea for a Superman or all-powerful superhero who begins to sort of realize just how limited he is, like just how few problems that facing the human race can actually be solved by being able to like drop kick somebody into a volcano or punch a mountain in the face. And also I wanted to do a comic about Jesus Christ returning to Earth and being sort of appalled but what's been done with his legacy. And it occurred to me at some point that these are two sides of the same coin, that it's one sort of realizing the futility of physical force and punishment as a way to keep the human race in line, and it's about the other sort of bemoaning the fact that after 2,000 years, physical force and bribery are sort of the only sort of tricks we've come up with to making ourselves behave decently, and trying to like see if he can create an avenue by which we solve our mutual problems with empathy and trust. So it occurred to me that this would be a good sort of like Tango and Cash sort of buddy cop story.
Yeah. It works. Like, it is very, very interesting to see sort of within the comics medium, which relies so much on huge fight scenes and everything in order to convey conflict resolution. That's sort of the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Of superhero comics in particular, is that
it's usually the most, if movies or comics, it's usually the most boring part because it's their one sort of thing that's the cliche that's at the center of all of them, is that eventually they're all going to fight it out, and the good guy is going to prevail. So basically the good is just what makes it the good is the fact that it's able to use violence just a little more effectively,
right,
than the evil people.
And I love how in the first issue, God is like, okay, I'm gonna send my son down, and living with Sunstar, which is the name of the superhero character, gonna live with him and sort of toughen him up a little bit, and then he goes on basically a ride along with Sunstar, who is stopping like counterfeit people that are counterfeiting like Pokemon style cards.
Yeah. Intellectual property theft, huge problem.
Yeah, and then he just proceeds to just beat the shit out of people and throw them out the window.
Guys are like killing themselves, like taking cyanide tablets rather than taken in, to protect their illegal Pokemon card trade. And yeah, he's just like smashing people to pieces and throwing them out windows. And this is a, sort of Christ's reintroduction to the world after 2,000 years.
Right. And then he comes outside to see his pile of bad guys, and he asks Jesus, where'd they all go? And he said, I healed them.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Jesus is getting Sunstar to sort of like question the causality of the people. Like most people, there's not nearly so much evil in the world as there is hunger. Like most people who do bad things do it because they're trying to medicate, or they're trying to fill a need that they have that they could not fill otherwise. I'm not saying that it's justified per se, or that there aren't bad people in the world. I'm just saying that most evil is a net result of the fact that we as a society have taken care of people inadequately.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how you characterize God, or Jesus' dad. God, you just call him God. There's no reference to him really. Jesus calls him my dad or my father,
daddy, or
right.
Something like
yeah. But generally throughout, he's just referred to as God. There's not necessarily like some Trinitarian thing happening in this, but the way in which you sort of portray him is he's capricious and short-tempered and foul-mouthed and all these things.
It's I try to be biblically consistent. That's the way he's portrayed much of the Old Testament. Not always. I mean, there are books of the Old Testament that have more, portray him more. I think it's the Elohimist interpretation, where he's more sort of an abstract force of nature that cannot be really defined. But for the most part, he's like your uncle with a drinking problem, or some guy who throws temper tantrums at the slightest provocation.
Right.
He's like Joe Biden at like a rally stop. Start a random argument with some lady in the back of the theater.
Barely remembering the Declaration of Independence. Oh, God. Sorry, we could go down that segue, but let's stay focused. This is sort of the backdrop in which Jesus decides he's going to give it the old college try, and like go down and spend time with people. Do you think that within the context of your story, Jesus is sort of like making a referendum on like how his dad set up the world?
Yeah, I think that like all kids are, we are all sort of responses to the shortcomings of the world created by our parents, and I think that's why you see like styles of child raising change pretty much from generation to generation. Like my generation, Gen X, it's like we were all kind of like latchkey kids. It's like your parents were, even if your parents were home, they were like, go outside. I don't want to even see you until dinner time. So you were just out there doing God knows what. And, as long as you came back alive for, dinner, everything was fine.
Yeah.
And I think that as a result, most people in my generation felt kind of cynical about, our families, or, we felt like, sort of abandoned and jaded, and we didn't really have a lot of closeness to our parents. And so when it became our turn to have kids, we became helicopter parents. We're like, got, are up in their shit every little minute of the day, making sure, that they're riding their bikes and not falling off, or we're at every soccer practice or whatever, which is the other extreme. And so I'm sure that these kids that we've raised, when it comes time for them to have kids, are probably going to be so annoyed with the helicopter parenting, they're probably going to go back to our parents' mode of sort of hands off, free range parenting. But yeah, we're all sort of referendums on the generation we came from.
Right. Yeah. One of the terms you just used was latchkey kid, and that's in different scenes. That's how Jesus, his own childhood, so to speak, that's how he presents himself, really.
Yeah, and in fact, the church he ends up creating is Church of Jesus Christ Latchkey Kid, because it's about how when he was, he'd been left alone for millennia while God was off dealing with the problems of the human race and of the earth, and trying to keep us all from going off the deep end and killing and enslaving each other unsuccessfully for the most part. and then until he got so disgusted, he left. And then Jesus is like, well, then I've got to go down, because, if you're not going to be there to help these people, to keep them from killing each other, then I've got to go warn them that they're on their own now, and that they need to get from each other what they used to expect from you. And that's basically my interpretation of the gospel, that this is what Christ came to do, was to inspire divinity within people, not to necessarily look to God to give them rules so that they, if they follow these rules, they will be okay. But to say, no, you've actually got to, the rules aren't enough to keep you in line. What you really need to do is change your heart and just become genuinely good people.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that reflected in any expressions of Christianity, in the real world at this point, that particular type of?
Yeah, I see it, but I think it's really doesn't exist in the institutions of Christianity. I think it's more in individual Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the institutions of Christianity lend themselves overwhelmingly to the other interpretation, where it's because this is what their institutions are usually built to do. It's if you follow our bylaws and you give us money, you can pretty much, you've bought your way into heaven, and now you can get away with whatever you want because you're on the right team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that dates back to once Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, because it was a very strange marriage of philosophies, because the Christ basically came to earth during the Roman occupation, and a lot of his teachings are about how to live under the occupation of somebody who is supreme and can use violence against you, and you cannot really use violence to free yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you try to fight the Romans, they're just going to kill you. If you succumb to their bribery, they're just sort of enslave you. Really, all you can do to get out from underneath the Roman thumb is to sort of drop out, to refuse to be bribed by them, not care about the material things of this world, and to not be afraid when they threaten to punish you, but just sort of to live as if you are already in the kingdom of God. And that was his advice to pretty much everybody who asked, sell everything and follow me, or trust God to provide like he does for the birds and the lilies of the field. He was basically telling people that the way you drive an empire crazy is by not playing the rules. It's not by, and if you raise up arms and you form your own army, you're kind of playing by the rules that the empire has, is used to playing by. They know what to do about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just stop caring about the material wealth that they can offer you, or playing by the rules they can impose on you, they have no idea what to do about that. And that's the scariest thing an empire can imagine. And so that was the philosophy of Christ. But how do you make that work for actually an empire's benefit? Once the Roman Empire actually made Christianity the official religion of the empire, it's how do you take a guy whose whole philosophy is about how getting out from underneath the thumb of an empire and make it then work for that very empire?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to really do it is to say, well, to turn it into sort of a cult of personality. Well, if you believe in Christ, then you'll get eternal life, and you're also eligible for all these other benefits and miracles, and we'll have people come by and check on you, and it's really about turning this personal message of redemption into more of an institutional sort of pyramid scheme. And that's sort of how they made it work made Christianity work for major institutions like church and state.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that to this day, that's primarily what Christian institutions are good at doing, is providing for the institutions themselves, getting people to play by their rules in exchange for some of the promises of eternal life and and the goodies you get from being part of a large team, but not really answering those individual problems of feeling inadequate and oppressed by the world around you,
mm-hmm.
because they're more interested in doing the oppressing.
Right. I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I think that's that's all just a very good encapsulation of a lot of the issues within institutionalized religion, as well as just the history of Christianity itself and how it's departed from what is presented within the gospel and the gospel texts, not the gospel as what is actually taught.
Yeah, one thing that's kind of interesting about how the Bible was created was that when it became the official religion of the Roman Empire, they decided, well, now we need one sort of canonical Bible, because before then they just sort of, every church just sort of had their own lists of books that they read in church services, some of which were read in some churches but not in others. So when they were trying to come up with the one canonical Bible, they basically sent a list of all 50 bishops. They said, we want you to make 3 lists. We want you to make one of like, this is canon and unquestionably this has to be in any Bible. Another one where it's like, well, this is more on iffy, warrants possible inclusion, but I can't say for sure. And then the third one was just like, this is batshit crazy, and under no circumstances should this be included in a Bible. And only one book of the Bible that made it into the Bible landed on any of the bishops' batshit crazy list. And can you guess which one it was?
Batshit crazy? I mean, Revelation is pretty batshit crazy.
Yeah, that was it. The Revelation book showed up on several of the bishops' batshit crazy list. But the reason why it ended up making it into the Bible was because not only the fact that it actually has an ending, provides an ending to the story of not only the Bible but of human civilization, but also because it allows them, it provides the church with authority. It says, this is what's going to happen to anybody who is a heretic or anybody who tries to change what we're saying now. These are the false prophets. This is you are the Antichrist, and you will be ultimately cast into the lake of fire. So that book was included, even though everybody kind of knew it was a little nutty. It was included because it was the one that put the institutional stamp of authority on the Christian religion.
Yeah. Fun times. Yeah, I remember reading Reza Aslan's book Zealot. I don't know if you've read that one.
Oh, yeah, I loved Zealot.
Yeah, so one of the things that he talks about in there is about the sort of development just around early church leadership. And you actually sort of hint at this in an interaction that you have Jesus have with a street preacher where Jesus is coming out of a gay bar where he just had some sort of gay restaurant. It's got
it was a gay bar. He didn't know it was a gay bar,
right? And he and your Jesus wouldn't care.
But it was called Hail Marys, so it reminded him of home,
right? And so this street preacher comes up and says, "This is a love confrontation," and then tries
love
to
confrontation,
yeah, and then starts talking about Paul, and Jesus is like, "Who the hell is Paul?" I don't know anybody named Paul. I told Peter and I told James, but I don't know anyone named Paul.
Yeah, it's very much a reference to the fact that the New Testament is largely an argument between Paul's interpretation and the interpretation of James, which Peter was also a party to. And it's weird that the argument was kind of settled in favor of Paul, who says you don't really need to do good things to, be a Christian. You just sort of need to be on the right team, and that's good enough. And Paul won the day, despite the fact that he never even knew Jesus, never met him. Right. And, James was like his brother. So if there's anyone who should win the argument about this is what Christ says and this is what he means, and I think Reza Aslan makes this point in his book, it should be the guy who, shared bunk beds with him. Right. The guy who, knew him better than anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just sort of crazy how lost or obscured or obfuscated that is to the great majority of Christians in the world. Just that is just something that's blended into history.
Yeah, well, most Christians, don't really, not only do they not know the Bible, they don't really know how it was made. So to them, one book is as canonical as another. And, in their interpretation that's offered to them by their megachurch is as canonical as, actually what the authors themselves are saying. So they're like 2 or 3 steps away removed from the reality of what Christ was actually saying. They're not really basing their faith on what Christ said. They're basing their faith based upon what their chosen religious leader is saying, based upon, the writings of other sort of presumably Protestant fundamentalist thinkers from hundreds of years ago, who are basing it upon, Martin Luther, and then who is basing it on, Paul, who never even met Christ. It's like if you had to, and I thought about this once, like if you had to rank the 10 most important figures of Christianity, of Christian religion, I think Christ would probably be like number 9 or 10. There's probably at least 8 or 9 guys who are more influential in terms of what modern evangelical Christians believe than Christ was.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Oh man, that's a pretty interesting experiment. Luther, Calvin, Augustine.
Yeah, I would probably put Amy Semple McPherson on that list above Christ. Maybe Billy Graham.
Billy Graham. Yep. Yeah, for sure. Oh man,
maybe Guy Fieri. Who knows?
Mark Driscoll.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Let's also talk just about how you sort of build the cosmology of this world, because I think one of the ways in which you present this, with God the Father being this capricious sort of asshole, really, and just...
I think he comes off initially as an asshole, but then you realize later that it's not so much he's an asshole as he's frustrated. He has a deep love for his son Jesus and also for the human race, both of which have sort of deeply disappointed him.
Yeah. So that's better, and that's a nice callback to the title of your other book. God is disappointed in you. So couching that, like when you first see him, when you're first introduced to him in this volume, he comes off as a jerk, and that's coming from a place of hurt and disappointment. But he sort of lashes out with his anger. It sort of makes suffering make sense. And in a way also elevates Jesus's ethics that he's proposing, and these sorts of things that he thinks humanity should do. And where I think that really crystallizes in the book is when God just sort of grabs Sunstar and just teleports him to heaven, and he takes him to the food court, and amidst this really funny scene where they are going to these different restaurants that have gone to the great beyond, different franchises that are now gone. Sunstar's like, so the real answer to why there's suffering in the world, and then God makes this incredible confession that he's just lazy.
he's an idea guy. He's interested in like creating eyeballs or bodies, but he's not so interested that he'll stick around and make sure they don't get cancer or
Mm-hmm.
that they're not going to get old. It's like once an idea is done enough to where it's no longer interesting to him, he will move on to something else, which I think is probably true of most of us.
Right. Yeah. Though when you elevate it to the point of godhood, it's like, okay, so that's a way to sort of understand suffering is.
Yeah. I'm amazed that like the philosophers of the rationalist era and whatnot never really came up with this as an explanation. It's like all like how can God be good, all knowing and all powerful, and there still be evil in the world? It's like, well, maybe he's just sort of lazy.
Hmm. Yeah, and I
He meant
mean,
well.
like when you think of other modern expressions of the idea of deities, even within comic books, I'm thinking of Doctor Manhattan, who slowly becomes less and less concerned with human affairs, and like
Yeah,
that Doctor Manhattan coldness isn't there in this character that you have as God, but there is like a sense of remove, which I think all of us sort of feel whenever we're trying to understand the divine. If we don't feel it all the time, we feel it at some point in our lives. If we are religious or are pursuing like a religious track in life in some way, that's something you have to butt up against at some point. So I don't know. It was like sort of cathartic to have God cop to that, basically, and then also have Jesus be like, okay, this is sort of how my dad is. How are you going to cope with it?
right. Well, I think in a lot of ways, God is sort of the name we give to our own inadequacy. It's like we feel like insignificant and that our role in the universe is not what it should be. So we attribute these things to God that will make up the difference. That
Mm-hmm.
God is then what gives us this meaning, what makes up for our inadequacy, that
Mm-hmm.
allows us to, like, if you're an alcoholic, to maybe get through another week without drinking. That's a lot of pressure to put on God, and it's also something that it says more about us than it does about the deity. And I think it's, in a way, it's sort of profound. Like it says something good about God, and that God is that whatever he is, whatever a God may be, is something that we, in some capacity or another, need.
Mm-hmm. In what way? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, because we're all inadequate and alone and isolated from the universe. We all feel alienated. So, if not God, we need something to bridge that gap, because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. So God becomes the name we give to that thing, which allows us to feel like we have a place in the universe.
Mm-hmm. So similar to like 12-step philosophy, where there's
Yeah,
a higher power that.
that's what he is. He's our coping mechanism, if nothing else. Even
Mm-hmm.
it's if I think it was Hobbes who said, if God did not exist, we would need to create him. I think he meant to keep us from being naughty, but I think it's probably true on a more fundamental level. It's just to keep us from feeling uh, inadequate.
Mm. So
And I don't think they necessarily need the Christian God for that, or even really a deity at all. But I do think that we need something to medicate us from the sense of our own alienation,
mm.
and that whatever that is, that tends to be what we imbue with the powers that traditionally people have given to gods.
So do you think that that has anything necessarily even to do with like theism, or is it just sort of some sort of ideal that is operates as a receptacle
Well,
or a representation of
I
that?
think it's helpful if you think about God sort of in reverse. Like, it's not that God is out there and what is he like and what is he about? What's he doing?
Mm-hmm.
It's more about, well, what are we about? What do we need? And what are
Mm-hmm.
we doing? And what do we need from the universe to feel like we belong? And I think once you ask yourself those questions and you find the answers going that way, what you find is divinity, but you find a divinity in a way that is meaningful to you, as opposed to like like a church that you grew up in, they have one set of answers about what God is and what God does, and it might be a set of answers that really works for some people, that really makes them feel connected to the universe and gives their life meaning. But for another person in that church, it might not be meaningful at all. But if they're a member of that church, they sort of have to pretend like it is. So it's sort of like if you're going to the pharmacy, and they're just giving out the same medication to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
For the people that do have glaucoma, the glaucoma prescription they're handing out is terrific. This is just what I needed. But it's a little specious to assume that because it works for you, that this glaucoma medication is going to be what heals everybody, regardless of what their problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the problem, is that we've been going to the same pharmacy, getting the same pills. It's like there's, Christianity, like there's three major religions, or say like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam collectively make up about 4 billion believers on the planet, most of the planet. It's like, what are the chances that these three medications are good for like over half the world's problems?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not that good. But there's a lot of people being mismedicated. And the fact that the medication works for some people, makes them blind to the fact that it might not work for others.
Right.
And then there's other people, and I think these people are usually the people who end up becoming sort of like, the Westboro Baptist Church people, or the really dark fundamentalists. The medication doesn't work at all for them, and it just making them miserable. But they think that if they have to be miserable, that you should too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like thinking of it that way. And I think a lot of people that come from sort of evangelical backgrounds, like listeners to this show, were probably taught that is like just anathema to the proper understanding of God, is that,
Yeah,
because that seems like some hippy dippy roll your own spirituality.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, but I mean, the other analogy that you were using was medication and
Yeah,
medication as an analogy. The desire now within that field is to get to hyper individualized care,
yeah,
and like do the thing that's right for your body and for your psyche.
yeah. The key to, I think, a better planet and to happier people is for you to find the medication that works for you, not to pretend to be happy with the medication you were given.
Mm-hmm. And not to impose those medications.
Yeah, or to assume that because it worked for you that everybody should be on Zoloft or whatever. But I think this is how you get over the fact that the institutions abuse people in a way that Christ had never intended. It's like, if you reverse the order of causality, where we do not exist to serve these institutions, but they exist to serve us,
mm-hmm.
then you deprive them of all their power, which I think is ultimately what Christ was trying to do in his time on earth. Is like, well, how do we deprive the institutions like the Roman Empire or like the Sanhedrin of their power? And the answer is by forming our own direct connection to God, and not relying upon them to be that intermediary, not going to the pharmacy and just taking whatever they have on hand.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. I want to talk also about the devil in your story. What perspectives does he bring to the story that you're telling in Second Coming, and what is his sort of role in the dynamic between Jesus and God, and really just in general? Like, we see him interact with a handful of characters, but I'm curious what your perspective is on what his role is in this story.
Well, I got the idea for that iteration of Satan when I was working on my book Apocrypha Now, which is about the Jewish Midrash and the Gnostic Gospels and other sort of non-canonical Jewish and Christian writings. And I came across a book called the Acts of Bartholomew, which actually describes a meeting between Satan and Christ and his disciples. Christ basically arranges this meeting between his disciples and the devil. And it actually surprisingly kind of portrays the devil in a somewhat sympathetic light, because he's brought up in chains from hell, and the disciples are besides themselves with terror, this beast that's been brought up from hell. And then but then the devil's point is that, like, well, look, I was God's number one angel. I was, he made me out of fire, and I was beautiful and splendid, and he left me in charge of the earth. And I was, doing a good job for him, and I loved working for him. And then he comes to me one day and says, I've created these two humans, and you're going to be serving them. And he made them out of mud. And it was too much. It was a bridge too far for Satan, who kind of thought he was Christ's best friend. It'd be like if you were working at a job that you liked and you got along really well with your boss, and then he suddenly shows up with somebody new who it's their first day, and he's like, I want you to train this person. They're going to be your boss. That's kind of what Satan felt like. And and it's like I never felt like I really understood Satan's motivation until I read this Gnostic gospel. I was like, oh my God, that totally makes sense. And that's why he tried to overthrow God. Admittedly, not a good idea. And so that was kind of really informed my perspective of Satan, is that he's not just some like evil for the sake of evil, supervillain. He's a guy who himself feels aggrieved, and in a moment of weakness and jealousy tried to do the unthinkable, and now just wants to go back to the way things were.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and you present that as just this longing that just goes sort of unfulfilled, right? I mean, like,
yeah, in a way, he suffers from the same problem we all do. Is like he feels alienated from God.
Mm-hmm. Most people who come from evangelical backgrounds just have this idea of Satan as this sort of boogeyman who's trying to corrupt you.
Yeah, he's like a wrestling villain or something. He's just a guy who comes out, on a motorcycle and just starts calling everybody out, and then hits somebody with the metal chair when they're not looking. He's just sort of the embodiment of everything going wrong in your life.
Right. Yeah, but then there's these other sort of modern interpretations of him as like this bastion of individualism, or even just sort of he just made his will known and it conflicted with God. Thinking of like the Lucifer from like Neil Gaiman's run on Sandman and everything else that Mike Carey did afterwards. It's like, I never made any of you come here. That's one of the lines in the Sandman run. Where,
like how it was brilliant. Yeah, how hell was treated as like where people go to punish themselves.
Yeah,
where they go because they feel like they need to expunge themselves of guilt they accrued on Earth.
Right, but he never forced any of them to go or to stay.
Yeah, he's just sort of this like, well, all of a sudden, I've become the symbol to these people, and I never really asked for this.
I loved the scene with God just meeting Satan in a diner to try to work it out.
Yeah, it's sort of like they meet in Berlin, which of course is symbolic because it's where spies between East and West used to meet to discuss how to resolve these sort of tangled knots that in the Cold War that would hopefully result in nuclear de-escalation, or like it was about the Cold War, where they learned to sort of get along together, they learned to sort of coexist. So it has this symbolic meaning that Christ, or that God the Father and Satan are meeting there, and it is sort of like that's where we learn about their different perspectives about what happened when Satan tried to overthrow God.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the first issue, you have Jesus say, people don't believe in God so much as they hope for a witness to their suffering. And the world isn't saved by bribery, by violence, by power. It's saved by being brave enough not to be intimidated, by being honest, not to be bribed. And when we fail, it is saved one act of forgiveness at a time. I really love how that sort of encapsulates all these different themes that you present within the book. I want to focus in on, and again, sort of this seeing a witness as suffering. And we've already talked at length a little bit about what God represents for us, but in the ways in which this story sort of reflects our lived experience of just wanting some sort of acknowledgement that sometimes this like shit gets hard, and just having that sort of witness. Why is that an important theme for you?
Well, I think that we want to know that this means something, that we're not suffering in vain and that we're not suffering alone. And I think that's one of the good roles that religion has played in people's lives, and the way in which religion can still the roles religions can still play in people's lives and be a positive force in the world is by reassuring the people that we see that you're suffering and you're not alone, and we will all carry this burden together. And I think that's what's the value of churches and organizations and institutions based on faith, is that they provide this sort of reassurance. They provide this sort of witness to your suffering. And to the value of religion is to be found there, not necessarily in, the other impositions they put on, you need to believe these 12 tenets, or, you're going to hell, or, the other sorts of things that institutions have created in order to make sure that we're serving them.
My favorite line when Jesus is pastoring and sort of consoling Sunstar after he made a big mistake, and he's like, "You're not the first person to have an intense experience with God that didn't last." And I think that's just brilliant.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really writing that about myself, and it was just like, this is what I wish I could tell myself, back when I was originally sort of losing my faith. This is like my pep talk.
Yeah, and to see like this humble Christ figure consoling a superhero, there's a lot to that imagery. And what's it like to work in this sort of comic medium, and how was it working with your other collaborators like Richard Pace and others to bring this story to life in this medium where you can accomplish a lot through the medium and relying on their visual storytelling as well as your script?
Well, yeah, the thing that really attracts me to comics as a medium in general is that it is a visual medium, but unlike television or movies, it's a relatively low cost visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
They don't invest nearly as much money in producing a comic book as they do like a TV show or a movie. As a result, there's a lot less oversight, so you can be a little more experimental. You can tell stories that wouldn't necessarily get the mass following you would need to justify a major motion picture or a TV series that would be released on a network. Now, with streaming services and independent movies, of course, a lot of that is changing. But that's sort of what I've always really liked about comics, is that there is this added layer of freedom to be experimental, to tell stories that might not translate well elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's a little more intimate. You do get a more direct collaboration with your artist, where it's like when we were deciding like how something is going to look, or we want to go back and fix something. It's really just a conversation between two people, maybe three at the most, if you want to bring in the editor or the colorist. So it's a lot easier to get things done person to person, whereas if you're trying to do that on another visual medium, it usually means the involvement of teams and different layers of communication, and it has to be run by the producer. So I like the experimentality of the comic medium, and also the fact that it's more like a boutique than working in a Sears. You can make changes and do things with a relatively while communicating with just a few people that fairly well.
Right. Yeah. I think that's why it works so well, is that the facial expressions that Richard Pace provides and all the different visual gags. Like, I really appreciate the way in which you are able to use humor as like an entry point to make a very incisive social commentary. We're sort of primed for that now after 20 plus years now of like The Daily Show. We're primed as a culture to, like, if you're going to hit us with something heavy or meaningful, even not even necessarily like heavy and a downer, but just significant.
Yeah.
To give it that spoonful of sugar of humor, then provide that. So it really just goes goes very well with your capacity as a storyteller, which I've appreciated. The first thing I read of yours before I even knew you did comics was God is Disappointed in You. With someone like my background, it's was sort of tailor made for me to enjoy, and to see that married in this medium is really cool.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it just feels like the natural to me. It just feels like this is the frequency my brain resonates on, and this is the way I would like to hear about these things. I feel like, in a way, everything I'm writing about, whether it's God is Disappointed in You and retelling the Bible, or it's writing about superheroes, or I like to feel like it's a conversation between just two people at a bar. And this is the way I would talk to somebody in a bar. This is the sort of the way we would tell a story to each other. Just two people like in a room. And to me, that's always the most meaningful, because this is about what it's not you trying to work within a style or trying to work within a genre. It's just you putting your quirky perspective on the world on the line in as blunt a way as possible. And to me, that's what humor is. It's just being as blunt as possible.
Yeah, yeah. To close out, I'd really like to talk about the letters pages that you had in the floppies, or the single issues that came out of the book, because you actually featured a lot of feedback. And since we started the conversation talking about the initial reaction and this negative push, what has the response been that's made its way to you since you've started publishing this book?
It's weird, but the response, was overwhelmingly negative before it came out, and then after it came out, became overwhelmingly positive, which I find really vindicating, because it's like, well, people hated it because they didn't know what it was trying to do, and then once they actually got a chance to read it, then they saw that I was not actually mocking Christ, that I was actually just struggling with my own ideas about the nature of Christian faith, and about how to heal a world in which violence and bribery has largely brought it to the brink of destruction. And I think once people saw the sincerity and they realized it wasn't just like a cheap gag at the expense of Christ or Christians, the tone of the response immediately changed. And I've had conversations with people who are still not on board at all with the theology I present in the comic, but they are usually very polite and understanding of what I'm trying to do. And I think that's where we find our common ground. Is it's like they might not agree with me, but they don't feel like they don't feel like my intentions are themselves harmful.
Right. Yeah. There's not this presumption
It's
that
not
you're
mean.
Yeah. It's not mean, and it's not like you're trying to convert other people and say this is the one true Christianity or something.
As I write in my author's note, I'm not trying to mock the faith of millions. I'm just trying to bring something new into the world.
Mm-hmm. Can you say anything about the next volume, or what's next for the series at this point?
Yeah, there will be a next volume, and it's going to I think be a little more character focused, a little less plot oriented, because the first 6 issues do sort of felt like a car chase for me. There's all these things happening, and it's all one after another. And so the next volume, we're going to spread things out a little more, and have maybe an issue that just deals with Sunstar's origin, or Christ in his attempt to like get disciples. So we're going to do more sort of character focus. I think people have already got the concept of like Christ sharing an apartment with Sunstar. There's no point in doing that story over and over again about what it would be like for a superhero to be paired with the Son of God. Now we're going to explore their own sort of like lives on Earth in greater depth.
Mm-hmm. Great. That'll be great. And I look forward to reading that as well. Mark, thank you so much for joining me and talking about Second Coming. Where can people find that book, and what else do you have on the horizons?
Well, I recommend people going to their local comic book store and getting Second Coming Volume Number 1 there. It will be available in non-comic book stores, and I think on March 10th. But why wait? you could go into your local comic book store and get one today.
Mm-hmm.
And additionally, Billionaire Island #1, the first issue of my new comic book about an artificial island where billionaires go to like escape the end of the world, or so they hope. That comes out tomorrow, or I guess it will be last week by the time this podcast comes out.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out on March 4th. It will be in stores, in comic book stores.
Great. And any other social media or any of that other fun stuff that people like to plug?
Please follow me on Twitter. That's where I post most of my information and spoiler panels that I really like of projects that I'm working on. And I'm at Manruss, MANRUSS on Twitter.
Great. Mark, thank you again so much for joining me and talking about
Thanks,
your work.
Blake. Pleasure as always.